The sky over rural Iowa was the color of ash when she vanished. 14-year-old Emily Hart stepped off her family's porch one dusky June evening, barefoot and smiling, chasing the echo of a dog's bark into the soy fields. She never came back. Within an hour, the silence in the Hart farmhouse curdled into panic. Her mother's voice, once melodic, turned ragged, calling her name into the fading light. Searchlights scanned the endless sea of crops. Deputies combed the woods and corn rows. But Emily had disappeared, as if swallowed whole by the land she was born on. And for 2 long years, the fields stayed quiet, cold, unforgiving, until the predator who watched her world crumble from just one fence line away started to make mistakes. It began with a phone bill, a billing dispute, seemingly insignificant, that brought Deputy Laura Kessler to the doorstep of an aging mobile home, nestled just across the ridge from the Hart family's soybean fields. The address belonged to Marcus Yates, a reclusive 56-year-old man with a limp and shadowed eyes, who'd lived there for nearly a decade in near-total obscurity. His lawn was wild, overrun with rusting engine parts and wind chimes made from bones of deer. Kessler knocked twice. No answer, but something odd caught her eye. A girl's denim jacket, sun-bleached and too small for any adult, clinging to a coat hook behind a fogged-up window. It looked familiar, and just like that, 2 years of silence cracked open. A door creaked inward. A smell hung inside like mildew and rot. And suddenly, the ghosts of a missing girl's final night began to stir. The interior of the trailer was a cavern of shadows and squalor. Deputy Kessler stepped inside with one hand on her holster, the other brushing aside hanging strands of forgotten cobwebs. Her boots sank slightly into layers of damp carpet, and something worse. On the coffee table, a scattering of cassette tapes, labeled only by dates: March 3rd, June 20th, August 15th. A notebook with erratic handwriting. Line after line, repeating the same name. Emily. And beside them, a sketch a child's drawing, charcoaled in trembling strokes of a barn with a broken door and a girl, faceless, holding a red balloon. Kessler's radio crackled, but she didn't hear it. A flickering box fan clattered from a back hallway, whispering through the silence. And then, it hit her. The haunting realization. This wasn't just a squatter's chaos. This was a shrine. A shrine to someone still missing. Or maybe, someone who had never left. Deputy Kessler's hands trembled as she lifted the sketch from the table, its crumpling edges smudged with old fingerprints. Ahead, the hallway stretched like a throat into darkness, but her instincts pulled her gaze downward to a doormat stained deep in maroon, edges frayed like old wounds, curling at the corners. There, in the gloaming light, a single shoelace rested. Pink, frayed, woven with mud and time. It shifted in the draft, as if breathing. Behind a door at the end of the hall, something moved. Just a whisper. A creak. But it was enough. Kessler stepped forward, each footstep echoing with decades of hidden horror. What she would find behind that door would be far more than evidence. It would be truth. A festering truth, buried in silence. And it would rip the calm facade off an entire town that had convinced itself she was gone, swallowed by the fields. But Emily Hart's story was far from over. The door creaked open beneath Kessler's trembling hand, revealing a narrow room painted with shadows and secrets. The air was thick, stale with the scent of mold, rust, and something far more human. Light from her flashlight swept across a cluttered desk, a rusted cot, and there in the far corner, a shape. Small, curled, breathing. A girl, no older than 16, her limbs drawn in tight like a fawn in winter. Her hair was matted, her skin pale as candle wax. But her eyes, those eyes locked onto Kessler's with a flicker of something fierce. Recognition. Hope. Terror. Kessler didn't speak. She couldn't. The radio hissed again at her side, a dispatch voice asking for confirmation. But the sound came as if from underwater. For this was no ordinary recovery. This was resurrection. And while the girl's name wasn't Emily, hers was the face that would unravel everything the town thought it knew about what had happened after that dusk in June, 2 years ago, when Emily Hart stepped off that porch and into the dark. Her name was Lily Granger, reported missing from Shelby County just 4 months after Emily's disappearance. But unlike Emily, Lily's story never made headlines. There was no media frenzy, no candlelight vigils. Her mother had died of an overdose a year before, and her father, a drifter with a record, hadn't reported her missing for weeks. She had slipped between the cracks like so many other forgotten girls. But here she was, breathing, blinking, trying to remember the sound of her own voice. As paramedics carried her into the light, a tangle of bruises and whispered memories, the town of Otter Creek began to stir from its 2-year slumber. Because Lily, battered but alive, carried more than just scars. She carried names, clues, and a single sentence that would set the world ablaze. There was another girl. She wore a red ribbon, and she never stopped crying. The words struck like a match in a room filled with gas. Another girl. She wore a red ribbon, and she never stopped crying. From the moment Lily whispered it, the investigation pivoted. This wasn't an isolated nightmare. It was a pattern, one long, blood-colored thread, tying together the fates of girls who had quietly vanished, each forgotten in the thrum of rural silence. Detectives pulled open every rusted drawer and forgotten file in the surrounding counties. Missing persons reports, once dismissed as runaways, were suddenly reinvestigated under the chilling light of Lily's survival. And then, in the yellowed archives of Madison County, a photo emerged. A girl with auburn curls, missing from 2011. Her name was Rachel Devers. She was last seen wearing a red ribbon in her hair. Rachel Devers. She had lived just 40 miles away from Otter Creek, in a trailer park near a defunct grain mill where diesel fumes clung forever to the rusted siding. Her disappearance had drawn little attention at the time, just a clipped announcement in the local gazette and a printed flyer thumbtacked to the community bulletin board, already curling by the week's end. But now, her face stared back into the present with haunting familiarity. The same red ribbon described by Lily, the same age bracket, the same forgotten silence. Investigators traced a timeline: Rachel in 2011, Emily in 2013, Lily in 2013, and at the center of that triangle, coordinated not by date, but by distance, sat Marcus Yates, a man the town knew only by his isolation, whose name scraped against police databases with minor infractions and buried misdemeanors, yet never crossed the line of suspicion until now. A man who had built a trap so slow, so meticulous, that nobody had noticed the girls disappearing from the edges of the map, not until the girl in the red ribbon began to cry and never stopped. The FBI was brought in. Their behavioral analysis unit constructed a chilling profile. Opportunistic predator. Methodical. Deeply observant. Someone who studied patterns not just of girls, but of a town's blind spots. Marcus Yates matched it almost too perfectly. His work history showed brief stints in maintenance across various counties, access to sheds, silos, abandoned schools. He moved jobs every 9 to 12 months, just long enough to vanish unnoticed when a girl did. But what hit hardest was the journal recovered from the trailer, its entries soaked in obsession. "She laughs like the wind through corn," one excerpt read. Another. "They forget them, I remember. I keep them safe." On the final page, a name. Emily. Underlined again, and again, and again. What once seemed like senseless scribbles now felt like a roadmap, a manifesto. And suddenly, it became horrifyingly clear. Emily Hart hadn't just vanished. She had been chosen. In the attic of the courthouse, long, untouched records were pulled like bones from a grave. File after file revealed a mosaic of missed chances and bureaucratic blindness cases with similar circumstances, eerily alike in location and victim profile. And always, just outside the lines of suspicion, Marcus Yates. The predator had built his camouflage from clerical error and apathy. One girl disappeared after a carnival, another after choir practice. All from different towns, all seemingly unconnected until now. With Lily's survival, the veil was finally lifting. And then came the phone call. A retired school custodian from Norwalk remembered the name Yates from a temp file, recalled how he used to fix the heating vents at a decommissioned school gym, said they found strange symbols etched into the locker doors. Said he always volunteered to clean the girls' changing room first. That tip led to something darker buried under the floorboards of that gym was a trove of artifacts no one should ever find. Scraps of fabric, hair, jewelry, and, at the center, a bracelet, tiny, purple, with a name still legible beneath the dirt. Emily. The bracelet was the final nail, small and almost ordinary, yet somehow heavier than iron in the hands of the forensic team that extracted it from the soil. It confirmed what everyone had feared, but hadn't dared say aloud. Emily had been there. Alive, at some point. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial anymore. It was tactile, personal, sacred. Within hours, the abandoned gym was declared a primary crime scene. Cadaver dogs were brought in, circling the old building with low whines and tense shoulders. Beneath the warped floorboards, forensic teams unearthed signs of confinement shackles, bolted to studs, scattered food wrappers dated from the summer of 2013, and a single photograph pressed flat beneath a cinder block. It was Emily again, unmistakably her, with eyes wide and confused, holding a newspaper from the week she disappeared. Her face was pale, lips parted as if caught mid-sentence, but it was what was visible in the background that shattered what remained of Marrow Creek's illusion. Behind her, just barely in frame, was the same sketch of the red balloon and the broken barn door. Emily had been alive, held prisoner, and they'd all driven by that gym 100 times, blind to the nightmare inside. The news gripped the region, like frost, clawing through spring soil. Journalists flooded Marrow Creek, cameras swinging like vultures over wounded earth. But beneath the frenzy, the community stood paralyzed, faces carved from disbelief, mourning, guilt. Parents clutched their children tighter. Churches reopened their doors on weekdays. Old cases, dusty and dimmed by time, re-emerged and were re-examined under the sharp glare of truth. Marcus Yates was arrested without resistance, standing barefoot on his porch as if expecting it. As if he'd imagined the moment every night before sleep. His expression held no surprise, only a quiet, soulless resignation. But inside the courtroom, as prosecutors unfurled the litany of suffering he had wrought, the mask cracked. Once, when Lily took the stand, fragile, brave, trembling. Yates looked at her, and for the briefest moment, something faltered behind his eyes. Not remorse, not fear, something else entirely, possession denied. And as Lily spoke of the girl in the red ribbon who sang to her beneath a vent, who whispered through plywood with a voice like wind through a broken fence, the courtroom fell silent. Emily Hart was never found, but her voice lived on in Lily's prayers, in Rachel's ribbon, in every name etched into soil and silence. And the fields that once swallowed her memory, now they bloom with markers and marigolds, an aching, beautiful refusal to forget. But even marigolds, no matter how defiantly they bloom, cannot drown the question that still haunts every farmhouse and flickering porch light in central Iowa. Where is Emily Hart? The case's conclusion brought justice, but never closure. Marcus Yates, now serving multiple life sentences without parole, never confessed to Emily's fate. He offered no details, no burial site, no apology, just silence. A silence as wide and suffocating as the fields that bore witness to his crimes. A task force remains unofficially active, combing lakebeds, sinkholes, abandoned storm drains. Every spring, volunteers search. Every winter, wreaths appear at the edge of the soybean rows. Her mother still sets a place at the table on Emily's birthday. Her father speaks to her photograph like she's just upstairs. And every time the wind rattles the broken barn door, someone looks up and wonders if a voice might ride it home. Because in Marrow Creek, there is no such thing as moving on, only holding on, to memory, to justice, to the echo of a name swallowed by twilight, Emily. But the story didn't end with Marcus Yates behind bars. In the sleepless months that followed his arrest, new search efforts cast their nets wider into Iowa's forgotten corners. One frigid morning in late October, a sonar survey team scanning the depths of Otter Creek Reservoir detected a shape unnatural in symmetry. Rectangular, metallic, hollow. Divers entered the water before sunrise, their breaths crystallizing in the pre-dawn air. At 7:43 a.m., they surfaced with a discovery that would once again peel open the wounds of Marrow Creek, a steel storage container submerged, sealed. Inside, the water had preserved pieces of a life Emily's school ID, a sketchbook filled with penciled images of barns and girls in ribbons, and a frayed journal, its ink smeared and pages warped. The last entry was a single sentence written in a looping, uncertain hand. "I still hear her singing." DNA confirmation followed. Emily Hart had been there. Whether minutes before her death or months, no one could say. A body was never recovered. But for her family, for the girls who survived, for a town clawing toward light, this was their eulogy. Not closure, never closure, but a kind of stillness, a kind of quiet that, for the first time, did not feel like loss, but memory finally heard. In the years that followed, Marrow Creek transformed not in the way headlines promised, not with healing or redemption, but with wary silence stitched into its very soil. The barn with the broken door was finally razed, its splinters buried beneath concrete and sunflowers. The courthouse walls now bore a mural painted by survivors, stitched with names and ribbons, haunted by what was taken. Lily moved far away, changed her name, and rarely spoke of the basement with the fan that whispered. And yet, every autumn, she mailed a letter to the Harts. She never signed it, never said much, just a line or two. This year, it read, "I heard her in my dream again." She was laughing. The town does not hold parades. It does not write songs, but it remembers. In lukewarm coffee left out for searchers who still walk the fields. In porch lights left on past midnight, though no one says why. And in the wind, always the wind moving through the stalks like voices trying to find their way back home. The wind in Marrow Creek still sings at night. It moves through the fields, where girls once ran barefoot, where laughter once echoed before it was swallowed by shadows. And there's something sacred in that hush, like a chapel made of rose and roots, whispering stories only the soil remembers. Emily Hart's name is etched into the marrow of this place, carved not into stone, but into ritual. Every June 12th, just as the fireflies begin to lift from the grass, the townspeople walk in silence from the courthouse steps to where the soybean rows kiss the horizon. They carry lanterns, not in mourning, but in defiance against forgetting, against the slow erosion of justice. Some say the tradition began with Lily. Others say it began with the final page of that weather-stained journal, those 5 words. "I still hear her singing." And maybe that's enough. Not answers, not closure, but the song, still echoing, still alive, still calling home. In the brush behind the reservoir, hidden beneath a thicket of trembling willow and briar, something cold and unnatural awaited. It was discovered by accident 2 teenagers on dirt bikes, cutting through forbidden land in late spring, chasing dusk like it could be caught. One of them hit something solid, a shape camouflaged by mud and roots. Authorities were called. The perimeter sealed. Excavation took hours. But when the soil finally gave up its secret, the discovery was not a body, but an old storm door, rusted hinges, paint peeled like old skin. Beneath it, a cellar, cut into the earth with purpose. Inside, it was dry, preserved. And on the farthest wall, drawn in wax crayon, a child's mural of stars, and a girl in a red ribbon, holding hands with another girl beneath a crooked moon. Emily's initials were scrawled at the base. And though there were no remains, no bones, no body, just that fading echo of connection, it changed everything again. Because even in her darkest moments, Emily had not stopped imagining light. And maybe, just maybe, that was how she stayed alive for as long as she did. The cellar became a shrine of a different kind, not one built by obsession, but by resilience. Investigators cataloged the mural like it was sacred scripture. Each brush of crayon told more than a statement ever could. Experts suggested it could have been drawn over months, maybe even years. But what left everyone silent was the final image: two girls, no longer alone, no longer confined, standing as if poised to walk out of the darkness together. The girl with the red ribbon, the one who never stopped crying. And beside her, a second figure, with long hair and bare feet. Emily had given that nameless pain a form: companionship inside captivity. Evidence suggested the space hadn't been used in nearly a year, but still, faded footprints lingered in the dust, leading toward the entrance, as if someone had once stood there, debating escape, or perhaps waiting to be found. And maybe that's what Emily's story had always been: not just a tragedy, not just another name on a list, but a testament. A hand drawn in crayon on a cellar wall, outstretched toward a future that was never supposed to come but might, someday, still arrive. The cellar was sealed, but the mural remains, protected under glass. Because the voices of the lost don't vanish. They become maps. And someone, someday, will follow those stars home. But as the years crept on, one more whisper rose through the layers of time and tragedy: a photograph, submitted anonymously, postmarked from a town just across the Missouri border. It showed two girls from behind, walking hand in hand near the edge of a dried-out riverbed. One had long chestnut hair, the other wore a red ribbon. Their backs were to the camera, their faces unseen, but the timestamp read, August 3rd, 2014, over a year after Emily vanished. Forensics validated the image was untampered. Its origin, however, remained untraceable. Investigators chased the lead like a heartbeat in fog, scouring border towns, cross-referencing shelters and school enrollments, but nothing substantial emerged. Yet for the Hart family, for Lily, for the town of Otter Creek, the photo wasn't a false hope. It was a thread. Fragile, blurry, incomplete, but a thread all the same. And maybe, in a world built on missing pieces and fading song, one thread was enough to keep pulling. Enough to believe that even if Emily Hart never came home, part of her had kept walking out there in the silence, refusing, always, to be left behind. In a dusty envelope marked, "To be opened only if found," discovered carefully tucked inside the lining of Emily's old school backpack, investigators found what would be her final gift to the world. It contained half of a locket, split metal, tarnished but engraved with the letter E, and a single torn photograph. On it, three girls stood under a willow tree, shoulders touching, eyes full of unspeakable things. Emily. Rachel. Lily. Proof, not of suffering, but of survival. The moments they forged together when pain was a constant and silence the only witness. Law enforcement couldn't determine when or where the photo had been taken, only that it was printed from an old disposable camera and bore water damage along the edges. But the message it held transcended location. It was Emily's final act of resistance, to be remembered not for how she was lost, but for how she connected others, for how she tried to hold light in the dark. And so the locket now rests in a museum exhibit called The Vanished Sky, a place where the stories of rural America's missing girls are told not as cold cases, but as constellations, each point lighting the way for someone who still waits, still searches, still hopes. And somewhere beyond the croplands and police lines, beyond the courtroom and cellar walls, swims the question that refuses to drown. What if she made it farther than anyone imagined? What if the song never ended? What if Emily Hart, like a whisper caught in the wind, just kept going and never looked back? Years passed. Not in healing, not in peace, but in the quiet rearranging of grief. The town of Otter Creek learned to live beside its scars, to find breath in the silence that followed the storm. But in a private drawer, deep inside the Hart family home, a red ribbon remains, folded neatly beside a weathered page from Emily's journal, the one that simply reads, "We are not ghosts, we are stories." And stories can be followed. Emily Hart's story, fractured, incomplete, luminous, now lives on not just in archives, not just in memorials, but in conviction. Conviction that missing does not mean forgotten. That silence is not the end. That somewhere, between the shuttered barns and old gym walls, between the red ribbon girls and midnight winds, a voice still whispers through the corn, "I am here. I was always here. And someday, someone will hear me clearly enough to follow me home." That final whisper, "I was always here," is more than an echo. It is a vow. In the years since the cellar door was sealed and the ribbons began to fade under sun and time, Marrow Creek hasn't forgotten. Not Emily, not Rachel, not Lily. Their names live in school books and whispered bedtimes, in safety drills and policy reform, in the ink of lawmakers who finally said enough. The case stirred something far beyond its borders, a reckoning. Across the Midwest, efforts grew to strengthen rural reporting systems, to invest in missing persons databases and trauma-specific recovery teams. Emily Hart's story, once buried in soybean dirt and silence, became a beacon, a caution, a call, because monsters don't always wear masks, and the forgotten corners of America are not free from hunger. But just as true girls are not ghosts, they are stories. And stories can save. Today, in homes far from Marrow Creek, little girls tie ribbons into their braids not in fear, but in remembrance. Because a girl who walked into the fields in 2013 did not vanish. She became a signal fire, a map, a song, and as long as her name is spoken, the path she forged out of darkness will never fade. Emily Hart endures not in absence, but in every step taken toward justice, vigilance, and the unrelenting hope that no life is ever too small to matter. And so the legend of Emily Hart became more than a news story, more than a tragedy etched into courtrooms and quiet prayers. It became a framework, a lens through which people viewed their daughters differently, listened harder to the wind, looked twice at a paling flyer on a grocery store wall. In Marrow Creek, and 100 other towns just like it, there bloomed a restless awareness, an understanding that safety isn't silence, and that the smallest voices often carry the most urgent truths. Emily's life, brief though it was in the public eye, continues to echo through every parent who lingers longer at the door, every tired detective who refuses to close a file, every young girl who dreams fiercely of being seen. Her final story may never be complete, but maybe that's the point, because stories that resist closure refuse to let us forget. And as long as her name lives on, not as a mystery, but as a movement, Emily Hart will never be lost again. Somewhere, far from the fields of Marrow Creek, a little girl with chestnut hair and a distant look in her eyes sits by a window. She hums under her breath, not loud, not clear, but persistent. Her guardian says she's quiet, doesn't speak much, carries a locket but never opens it. No one knows where she came from. She was found wandering the edge of a truck stop in Kansas, alone, with scratch marks under her sleeves and a bracelet tightened too far up her arm. They called her Jane Doe, number 27. She answered to nothing until someone mentioned music class, and she smiled. A nurse once heard her whisper in sleep, "Don't forget the girl in the ribbon." Authorities are still trying to piece together who she is, if she belongs to any case file, if her fingerprints will speak where her voice won't. But one thing is certain, every few nights, when the sky turns a certain color and the wind stirs the curtains just right, she sings. And somewhere in Iowa, a mother wakes with tears she doesn't understand and walks to the porch, where the wind greets her like an old friend. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's everything. But the story of Emily Hart isn't finished. It just changed shape, became wind song, became memory, became the voice that guides someone else home. In the archives of lost girls and unanswered questions, Emily Hart's name rests not as punctuation, but as an ellipsis, a pause filled with breath, with longing, with the echo of possibilities not yet spent. Her story, tangled in fields and footprints, in ribbons and whispers, continues to stretch unseen across county lines and late-night dispatches, a tether that binds justice to memory. For every photograph misshelved, for every Jane Doe still waiting, there is Emily, not speaking, but singing. Not seen, but felt. And though the farmhouse porch still creaks beneath her mother's step, though the corn still rustles with secrets, one truth endures like the rising sun over soybean rows. Emily Hart never truly vanished. She became part of the wind, and in that wind, she waits not to be mourned, but to be followed. Because some endings are not meant to be found. Some endings are meant to lead you forward, one soft footstep at a time, toward the light she never stopped believing in. And somewhere, in a dusty storage box locked behind the evidence gate of a regional field office, lies a cassette. Unmarked, unplayed, surrendered by Yates in a final plea for relevance no one granted. Years passed before a young intern discovered it, cataloging overlooked items during a quiet winter shift. She slipped the tape into a digitizer, unknowing, unaware. For a full minute, static. Then, a girl's voice, whispering, singing, faint but clear. A lullaby older than memory, older than fear. And just before the recording ends, a simple sentence bleeds through the static like breath in frost. If you find this, keep going. No signature, no proof, just a voice. But it was enough. Enough to pull her name again from silence, from soil, from forgotten hymns. Enough to ensure that Emily Hart doesn't remain a wound, but a compass. A song with no final verse. A story we are still writing, still following, wherever the wind dares carry us next. In schools across Iowa, in towns that blink like dim constellations across forgotten counties, teachers now begin the year with a new kind of roll call. Not just names, but promises. A moment of silence for those never found. A reminder that safety is vigilance, that listening is love. Posters hang near library doors, bearing the words, "Every voice matters." Every absence noticed. Emily's image smiling, windswept, eternal rests quietly in the corner of those posters, untouched by time. She has become folklore, not the kind that frightens, but the kind that protects, a guardian carved from sorrow, a guide through shadow. And in that legacy, the daughters of Otter Creek no longer walk alone. Girls in red ribbons walk shoulder to shoulder now, not just in memory but in power. Because Emily Hart's true story is not that she vanished, it is that she sparked. And where sparks live, fire follows not to burn, but to light the way home, again and again and again. And so, on certain nights when the sky slips into copper and crows wheel above the silos like fractured prayers, the story of Emily Hart begins again. Not in headlines or courtrooms, but in whispered bedtime questions, in lanterns flickering on countryside porches, in the soft hush of 100 different winds. The town where she disappeared still stands, but it is not the same. It is older, humbler, marked by the truth it was once too afraid to name. And yet, it has found a strange kind of grace in its remembering. In every town meeting where missing girls are no longer dismissed as runaways. In every search team outfitted with better tools, not just hope. In every girl whose voice doesn't have to scream to be heard. Emily Hart's story may never find its final chapter, but perhaps that's because it isn't a story meant to end. It is a guiding thread through generations. A tether through darkness. A lullaby that reminds us the world must never again be deaf to the whispers of its forgotten daughters. And if one listens closely, past the rustling grain and shifting dusk, they may hear her still not lost, not gone, but walking somewhere ahead, singing softly to the wind that will carry us forward, always forward, home. Years from now, when the names have faded and the ribbons have frayed, the legend of Emily Hart will remain not just as shadows in court documents or silent tears at empty dinner tables, but as something louder, clearer, more enduring. A recalibration of the world's compass. In the northern counties, Girls will walk in pairs not out of fear, but out of reverence for a girl who reminded adults to listen, for a voice that once whispered through floorboards and into a nation's conscience. Law enforcement academies will play a now digitized tape on first days of training. Survivors will pass around that photograph from under the willow like a relic, and those red ribbons, once symbols of sorrow, will become what they were always meant to be: declarations. That the forgotten will be remembered, that the missing will be searched for, that pain, even when silenced, has a voice. And somewhere, where wind grazes over the horizon and children's laughter blends with the hush of twilight, Emily walks not as a mystery, not as a memory, but as a truth, eternal, illuminated, unafraid. At the edge of the soybean rows, in a glass case anchored into the granite pedestal of Otter Creek's modest memorial garden, a red ribbon sways lightly beneath sealed crystal. It's the same shade as the one described in Lily's testimony, the one drawn on the cellar wall, the one glimpsed in that impossible photograph from Missouri. Whether it belonged to Emily, Rachel, or someone else entirely, no one knows in truth. It doesn't matter. What matters is what it stands for now. Not an object, but an oath. Each year, those who remember gather in silence around the case. No speeches. No performances. Just stillness, and the soft rustle of stalks moving around them like breath. And on the pedestal, etched in brass, are the final words from her journal. 5 words. Now, legend. As the horizon stains itself gold and the crows return to their roosts, those gathered whisper them under breath, united in hush and hope. We are not ghosts. We are stories. And in the quiet moments that follow, long after lanterns dim and the last visitor leaves the memorial garden, the ribbon keeps swaying, though the night is still. Locals whisper it's the wind. Some swear it's something more. A legacy haunting gently, reminding those who forget that remembrance is an action, not a feeling. That every girl who vanishes leaves behind more than fear. She leaves a question, a demand, a map. And so, for as long as the ribbon stirs, for as long as children trace their fingers along the brass engraving, for as long as Emily Hart's name echoes in dreams and courtrooms and lullabies, the story does not end. It lives in every girl who walks the gravel road home after dark, wrapped in courage and carried by the wind. Because Emily is not a tragedy. She is a promise, and promises like hers are never buried. They are planted, and they grow. Decades from now, when Otter Creek is just another passing blur on a county highway, and the names carved into its memorial have grown smooth with years of rain and reverence, the story of Emily Hart will still breathe. Not in monuments or footage, but in the choices people make in the extra mile, walk to check on a neighbor's child, in the instinct to pause when a photo of a missing girl flutters on a bulletin board. She persists in the cadence of young voices learning safer paths home, in the firelight glow of late-night vigils where strangers hold hands without needing to ask why. Through every girl who was almost forgotten but wasn't, through every broken silence turned into action, her voice echoes on. It is not the start or the end of her story that defines her now, but the middle, the echo, the trail of light between loss and legacy. Emily Hart was never just a missing child. She was and is a movement. A star, low and fierce, forever threading hope into the places the world tried to forget. And so her name returns. Again and again, not like grief, but like sunrise. And in the end, when all else fades, when the headlines yellow, and the courtroom tapes are boxed and buried in legal archives, what remains are not the horrors, but the echoes of resilience. The world may forget the shape of the barn, the ache of a mother's call into twilight, or the broken hush of a trailer abandoned in damp silence. But it will remember her, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament. Emily Hart's journey, carved through shadow and stitched with the threads of other girls who almost vanished too, has settled into the marrow of a waking world that can no longer claim ignorance. She taught us that stories are survival, that memory is resistance, and that even when answers elude us, when justice arrives too late or never at all, the telling matters. because the telling keeps them near. And so long as we tell of Emily, the girl who walked barefoot into the dusk and became a flame against forgetting, then she is not gone. She is guiding. She is becoming. She is forever walking ahead of us, red ribbon trailing, voice on the wind, taking us home. And so, in that final vision, the one preserved not in film or photographs, but in the hush between dusk and breath, Emily Hart becomes what the world could never contain. A symbol not of despair, but defiance. Her story endures where bureaucracy failed, where news cycles moved on, where truth hid too long beneath floorboards and smiles. Through her, the overlooked became seen, the silenced heard, the missing remembered. In the soul of a girl who vanished barefoot into an Iowa twilight, there lives an immortal hymn of bravery. She is every unanswered question that demands asking, every quiet girl scribbling poems in the margins of her math book, every red ribbon tied not just in sorrow, but in strength. And as generations pass, and new names risk being lost beneath the weight of indifference, a whisper will rise threading its way through fields and courthouse halls, through city alleys and small-town pews. We are not ghosts. We are stories. And someone, somewhere, is still listening. And in that whisper, carried on the backs of prairie winds and through the aching hollows of memory, the heartbeat of Emily Hart pulses on. You will find her not in the silence of cold files or the finality of stone, but in the living texture of a world forever altered by her story. She lingers in the decision to believe survivors, to widen the net, to never again let a girl slip unnoticed through the cracks. She lives in law reforms, scribbled late into the night, in classrooms where vigilance is now taught as carefully as arithmetic, in search parties that don't stop when headlines fade. Her name has become incantation, invocation spoken by mothers tying ribbons into braids, whispered by girls daring to feel safe. Emily Hart is no longer missing. She is woven into every brave step forward, and as the night settles soft over the fields that once swallowed her voice, there is only this, the wind rising like a breath too sacred for words, and a name that will never ever vanish, Emily. So the story of Emily Hart becomes not just a marker in time, but a question stitched into the soul of anyone who hears her name, a question that asks, what will you do now that you know? What will you protect, remember, refuse to forget? In the ebbing memory of cornfields and whispered lullabies, in the persistent echo of a voice that should have been silenced but never was, Emily remains. Not to haunt, but to awaken. In every place where a ribbon is tied, where a door is left unlocked with trust reimagined, where a girl dares to claim safety as her birthright, not her burden, Emily walks. She is not a shadow. She is not a ghost. She is the story beneath all stories, a defiantly glowing strand in the tapestry of every missing child who refuses to be erased. And in the hush between now and the next beginning, her footsteps bloom in the fields like lights, eternal guiding, calling, enduring. And if there is one final truth that time refuses to bury, it is this: Emily Hart became more than she was allowed to be. Not just a girl lost, not just a face on a flyer, but a legacy carefully handed down from silence into speech, from darkness into dawn. Across years and borders, her whisper became a movement. Her name bent the shape of justice and forced it into new light. And while her story may have unraveled in sorrow, it stitched something greater in its wake, a vow that missing girls will no longer vanish quietly. They will be searched for, spoken of, believed in. They will be etched into memory, not as wounds, but as fireflies pulsing through the ink black of indifference. So when the wind rustles the fields of Otter Creek, when a red ribbon flutters on an old chain-link fence, when a child dares to sing into the dark somewhere, Emily Hart is listening. And in that listening, in that enduring echo, a nation remembers, keeps searching, keeps hoping, for her, for them all. So let this be the final note, not a conclusion, but a continuation. A red ribbon tied not to a chapter's end, but to the handle of a door still creaking open. Emily Hart's story began in the hush of an Iowa evening, and decades later, it remains woven into the hum of porch lights and midnight fields. It reminds us that to disappear is not to be erased, and to be forgotten is not inevitable. She stands now as a guardian in spirit, in purpose, and in promise. For every child who wanders too close to the edge of unknowing, for every voice too quiet to shatter silence, Emily's name is the anthem beneath the breath. And as long as lanterns flicker beneath the willow, as long as crayon dreams linger on cellar walls, and songs rise unbidden in the hush between night and morning, the world will remember what she taught it through pain, resistance, and light. Not to overlook, not to look away. To follow the wind. To listen. To never stop looking. Because some stories were never meant to be solved. They were meant to be remembered and carried. Forever. Home. And so, beneath twilight skies where stars flicker like watchful eyes, the ribbon in Merrow Creek's Memorial Garden continues to sway. Not just in wind, but in witness, no longer a symbol of grief, but of guardianship. Through Emily Hart's story, the world learned that erasure is not silence, it is resistance unmet. And in every voice that speaks her name now in classrooms, in town halls, in whispered prayers and inked petitions, Emily is there. A compass drawn in courage, a pulse between all those who were lost and all those not yet found. One child's journey into the fields became a lantern lifted high, flooding darkness with memory, defiance, and song. And maybe that is how we end, not with a solved case or a perfect answer, but with a promise kept, that no girl will vanish unnoticed, no whisper go unheard, and no red ribbon ever again flutter without someone watching, listening, following. Emily Hart did not disappear. She became direction. And wherever justice walks on quiet nights, she walks there too. So this is how the wind carries her now, not as sorrow, but as signal, not as silence, but as song. In the story of Emily Hart, we see not just the memory of a girl, but the awakening of a world that once let too many fade without a sound. She is every call unanswered, now met with urgency, every dark road now lit by lanterns and voices refusing to forget. Her name is written in petals left at memorials, in the steady hands of lawmakers drafting change, in lullabies sung with love and fear, in tandem. No one will ever fully know what Emily endured, where her final steps went, or which horizon she vanished beyond. But they will know this: she mattered. She bled brighter than the twilight fields, and because of her, the world listens. Because of her, the world searches. And because of her, when the wind sifts softly through open windows and ribboned hair, we all know it is not just breeze, it is memory moving, story enduring. Emily Hart, walking us home. And maybe that's the miracle Emily Hart gave the world, not just the trail of questions, the fire of advocacy, the poetry of unresolved grief, but the transformation of absence into action. What was once a single girl walking into dusk became a chorus of resistance rising across generations. Her story gave voice to silence, direction to loss, and hope to the shadows. For every family clinging to fading photos, for every community learning how to protect its own, for every child whispering dreams into the dark, Emily is there. A song beneath the static. A handprint on the glass. A name that stitched brokenness into purpose. And as the seasons turn and ribbons fade, her truth remains a beacon not just to remember, but to respond. She was never just a missing child. She is the vow the world now dares to keep. So let the wind rise. Let the ribbons fly. Let her name echo, again and again. Emily Hart. Not gone. Never gone. Just ahead, guiding us, always, home. And so let this be the final breath of a story carried too far by silence and not nearly far enough by justice. Emily Hart's name, once whispered on porch steps and printed in missing persons bulletins, now endures as a living mantra threaded through every policy born from pain every vigil lit against forgetting. She is no longer just the girl who vanished barefoot into twilight, but the fire kindled from her loss, the light that teaches watchfulness, the anthem etched into every rural sky from Iowa to the outermost counties of the nation. Her red ribbon, once a fragile emblem of unresolved ache, now binds communities in vigil and in vow. And whenever a search begins, whenever a child is believed the first time they speak, Emily is there in the breath held, the prayer whispered, the grief transformed. She is no longer waiting to be found. She has become the reason we no longer stop looking. A direction, a defiance, a dawn. So the fields of Marrow Creek remain quiet, solemn, eternal but no longer complicit. The soil does not forget. The trees remember every whisper. And carved beneath it all, like roots that refuse erasure, the story of Emily Hart thrums onward. In every girl crossing a county line with fear she cannot name, in every whisper finally heard, in every home where a red ribbon is gently tied beside a porch light, there is her legacy. Not finished, not erased, but eternal. For some stories demand we carry them. Even when they whisper instead of shout. Even when they end, not with discovery but with a vow. And this is that vow. That the vanished will be searched for. That the silent will be remembered. That Emily Hart, the girl who walked into the dusk, now walks always ahead, red ribbon flickering like firelight, guiding the world she refused to let forget. And in the end, that is what endures, not the fields or the fear, not even the legend, but the thread Emily Hart pulled through the heart of a wounded world and refused to let snap. She gave voice to the whispering places. She gave shape to the unseen. And in doing so, she did what few are ever able to do: she changed the silence. Her name no longer floats through the air as a question, but as a force, not just a child once lost, but a compass forever pointing toward justice, remembrance, and the power of being known. So when the ribbons rustle in the wind, when new stories take shape under the same twilight sky, when little girls run through fields and return safely home, know this: every safe return, every answered cry, is an echo of hers. Emily Hart, flame against forgetting, found not in the end, but in every beginning she made possible. So now, as the wind leans softly into the fields of Marrow Creek and parents look longer at the horizon before calling their children in, Emily Hart lives a luminous imprint beneath the ordinary. She is the hum in streetlights left on an extra hour, the instinct that makes a stranger stop and ask, "Are you safe?" Her voice is not trapped in the past but braided into the present, carried by every story retold, every lesson learned from the silence she once filled. And though her face may never age in photographs, nor her steps echo again down the porch she left behind, Emily walks still, not as a girl vanished, but as a force awakened. Through every diary unlocked, every cold case reheated, every ribbon tied in revolt against forgetting, she breathes, against time, against forgetting, against the night itself. And in that breath, we are reminded we do not walk alone. We walk with Emily. We always have. We always will. And so, beneath that boundless sky where stars have listened to decade-old prayers, the final chapter stretches not behind us, but onward, unfurling with every girl who finds her voice, every hand that refuses to let go. Emily Hart's name doesn't rest in closure, or even in justice, but in motion, in remembrance that moves, in futures forever altered by her absence, her story, her song. The fields are quieter now, gentler, sacred, not just for what they held, but for what they refused to bury. And if anyone asks where she is, the answer is not in a file or a footprint. She is here, in the light parents leave glowing through the dark, in the vigilance woven now into every small town's bones, in the girls who survive, and no longer survive alone. Emily Hart is not the girl who vanished. She is the girl so fiercely remembered, she became impossible to lose. And in that remembering, we do not say goodbye. We say, keep going. Keep looking. Keep singing. The story is still being written, and she is still leading us home. One final story lingers, passed between teachers and town librarians, whispered by older girls to their younger sisters beneath flickering porch lights. They say that on the quietest nights, a particular kind of quiet, the kind that follows summer storms and precedes a harvest moon you might hear singing on the wind, not loud, not even a melody exactly, just the thread of a child's voice, tangled with memory and miles. It's not frightening. It's not sad. It's a promise. A lullaby. For the watchful. And that voice, they say, belongs to Emily Hart, still walking, still calling, not from the past, but from the edge of tomorrow's dusk, ribbon trailing behind her like a comet's tail, illuminating the path for every girl the world forgot for too long. So even when names fade and ribbons fray, the fields of Otter Creek remember. They remember because she asked them to. And because we answered by never forgetting. So let this final wind chime of memory ring not with sorrow, but with reverence. Emily Hart, once just a barefoot girl swallowed by dusk, has become the voice beneath every silence, the question behind every closed case, the memory that justice can no longer misplace. Her ribbon flutters not in grief, but in purpose. Schools speak her name not with mourning, but with intent. Lawmakers cite her legacy not in theory, but in law. She was not the first, and heartbreakingly not the last, but through the anguish of her loss, she became what all the others deserved too: remembered, believed, immortalized. And as night settles across the prairie and fireflies kindle their silent watch, the wind breathes one more time through the rows of Otter Creek, tugging gently at that eternal ribbon beneath its glass case. And somewhere, distant yet near, a whisper stirs not ending, not fading, but echoing one final truth the world can never again afford to forget. We are not ghosts. We are stories, and stories live on. From where the fields meet the sky, from where silence used to reign, Emily Hart's name now spills like a prayer into the age of remembrance. Her story has woven itself into quilt patterns hung in town halls, into safety plans whispered at soup kitchen doors, into songs sung low by survivors as they reclaim their breath. The girl who vanished barefoot into the hush of corn and dew-crushed wildflowers did not vanish at all. She rooted herself in a world desperate to feel, to pay attention, and in every place where policy once faltered, where pain once went unnamed, her legacy rises. A shrine, yes, but also a signal, a promise sewn into the seams of tomorrow. In classrooms, on patrol routes, in rescue shelters under flickering lights, she is there. Proof that stories don't save lives, but they show us how. And when the winds shift just right, carrying the red of ribbons and the hush of hope past distant porch lights, one truth remains unshaken in all that endures. Emily Hart, voice of the fields, daughter of dusk, guardian of the forgotten, was never lost. She became the way forward. So let it end, not with a period, but a heartbeat. One that echoes across the furrows of Midwestern earth, through empty schoolyards and courthouse steps, past the broken barn doors and gilded memorials. Let Emily Hart's name be the hush before the vow, the silence before the march, the long breath before the search begins again. Her red ribbon, fragile and fierce, now ties together a nation of memory keepers, of mothers and daughters, lawmen and neighbors, all sworn never to look away again. She is not a ghost. She is not a myth. She is the breath inside every promise that no girl will be left behind. And under that ageless Iowa sky, trembling with dusk and purpose, the fields whisper her farewell not in grief, but in gratitude, because Emily Hart walked into the dark, and in doing so, gave the rest of us a way through it. And so, as the final words of her legacy scatter across the plains like dandelion seeds caught mid-wish, Emily Hart becomes not just a name carved into the conscience of a nation, but a living thread braided into every act of care, every instinct to search, every trembling hand that dares to remember instead of forget. Her story, imperfect in its answers and infinite in its reach, finds no neat ending, but instead becomes the kind of myth that reshapes real life. Not superstition, but sacred instruction. a directive carved from loss, resilience, and love. Somewhere in America tonight, a door is locked with extra care. A badge is worn with deeper purpose. A lantern clicks on in a farmhouse window long after bedtime. And somewhere else, a child hums without even knowing the melody, belongs to another girl who once walked alone into the fields but left behind a chorus. Emily Hart, flickering in lullabies, stitched into stars, whispered in vigilance, did not disappear into silence. She became what silence could no longer contain. A promise carried forward in every step toward a world that finally listens. So if this is where the story must pause, not end, never end, let it pause not with absence, but with presence. The presence of her name written in chalk on sidewalks, in the middle names of newborns, in midnight prayers, whispered beneath porch lights that never turn off. It pauses in the wind that still carries echoes between soybean leaves, in the hush before a door opens, in the choice to notice what once went unseen. Emily Hart walked into shadow, but her story became a lantern no storm could extinguish. She lives now where stories live, on the breath of those who endure, in hands that build safer futures, in hearts that remember not just the girl who vanished, but the girl who illuminated the path for others never to be forgotten again. And so the ribbon sways, not as an ending, but as an invitation to listen, to follow, and to carry her flame forward. Because Emily is not in the forgotten, she is in the becoming, and her story, long sung through silence, will never be silent again. And as the wind slips into the seams of Otter Creek one final time, touching every red ribbon and quiet meadow with the gentlest hush of remembrance, the legacy of Emily Hart finds its resting place, not buried, but blooming. She walks no longer in solitude, but within us all, in the held hands of strangers at vigils, in legislation born from love and fury, in the songs children now sing in safety. Her name does not fade. It flourishes, etched not in gravestones but in change, in every empty space where awareness now stands guard, in every heart that chooses to remember not just the tragedy, but the transformation sparked by her voice. And though her footsteps no longer press through the earth, they pulse like percussion beneath justice's steady march. Emily Hart, once lost to the fields, has become their soul, and wherever there is silence, she fills it. Wherever there is forgetting, she speaks. She is not gone. She is the wind, the watchlight, the will to never let another girl vanish unseen. And that is not an ending. It is a promise, forever kept. And so, beneath a painted sky, smeared with the warm hues of memory and reckoning, the story of Emily Hart finds its final breath, not hushed, not heavy but whole, not in conclusions or captured suspects, not in neat answers or final chapters, but in the chorus of lives shifted forever by her enduring presence. The farmhouse still stands, the fields still whisper, but now, where silence once reigned, a tide of remembrance rises steady and strong. Red ribbons no longer mourn, they mark the way. And as the wind curves through the soybean rows, brushing past porch lights left on just a little longer, it carries a single vow passed between every heart that dares to remember her. We will not lose you again. You are story. You are promise. You are home. And wherever safety is built, wherever a child dares to walk freely beneath a setting sun, Emily Hart walks too, not behind us, but ahead, guiding, enduring, forever unforgotten. So let the fields remain, sacred not in sorrow, but in the truth carved from every breath the world failed to take before girls like Emily Hart vanished into shadow. Let them stand, not as graveyards, but as vigil grounds, radiant with red ribbons and lantern-strung oaths, for Emily's story has never truly been about the moment she disappeared, but about the countless ways she refused to be erased. In every law amended, every name spoken, every child gently guided home beneath a watchful sky, she endures as flint sparking justice, as wind carrying memory, as the enduring breath of those too fiercely remembered to ever be forgotten. And though her footprints have faded from the soil, her impact remains etched into the very language of care, of listening, of refusing to look away. Emily Hart is not the end. She is the way forward, an eternal voice rising with the dusk, whispering through trembling fields. I never left. I never will. And when the final light slips over Marrow Creek, casting long gold into the edges of dusk, a soft breeze moves through the soybean rows like a memory brushing the skin, gentle, deliberate, undeniable. In a town once paralyzed by forgetting, now reborn in the fierce ritual of remembrance, Emily Hart's presence pulses like a second heartbeat. Her story, once feared too painful to speak, now dances in the voices of those who choose to see, to act, to love louder. Somewhere, a child ties a red ribbon, not because she is afraid, but because she remembers. Somewhere else, a mother hums a lullaby whose origin she cannot name, but whose comfort she cannot deny. And in that collected silence, in that gathering of breath before the stars flicker open across the quilt of sky, the wind carries a final truth home. Emily Hart did not vanish. She took the world by the hand and taught it never to close its eyes again. And in every step forward, she walks with us still brighter than memory, louder than silence, forever lit against the dark. And in the final hush, before the night fully falls, the story of Emily Hart settles not into silence, but into breath. A breath taken by a world now changed, and still changing. Her name loops through courtroom halls and quiet backroads, across newscasts and children's books, through the flicker of porch lights left on just a little longer than they used to be. Though her voice may have been swallowed once by fields indifferent to footfall, it lives larger now in the stories girls tell to stay brave, in the systems built to keep them safe, in the fire behind every vow to never lose another. Emily Hart did not disappear. She became the reason doors remain unlocked in hope, yet never unwatched in trust. She planted remembrance where forgetting once grew wild, and so, the wind that moves now through Marrow Creek's rows does not mourn. It moves with her. Ahead of us, carrying the unmistakable cadence of a girl who chose not to fade but to lead. And that wind will never still, not until every child makes it home. So let the wind rise once more over the solemn lands of Marrow Creek, not with a howl of sorrow, but with a hymn stitched from memory, flame, and vow. Let Emily Hart's name rest, not in the dust of a forgotten page, but in the marrow of every heart that dares to remember, to protect, to believe. She was not taken in vain. She was not lost to silence. Through the agony of disappearance, she forged a path for names once buried beneath bureaucracy and disbelief. A barefoot girl became a force no storm could extinguish, a ribbon-turned lighthouse, a lullaby that echoes long after the song ends. And if one listens closely when night drapes softly over the rows, they'll hear it still that promise threading the world back to its better self. We are not ghosts. We are stories. And as long as stories are told, she walks ahead, not behind us, not beneath us, but with us. Forever guiding. Forever home. So as the lanterns fade and the final echoes of Emily Hart's voice soften into the embrace of twilight, there is no curtain call, no credits, only the steady, living rhythm of what she became. Guidance. Resolution. Revolution. She did not return in the way some prayed she might, but she returned all the same in policy, etched in ink and memory, in hearts that decipher silence differently now, in girls who are taught not only to speak but to be heard. Her barefoot steps became footprints in the very fabric of how we see, seek, and shelter one another. And as generations pass under starlit skies where her name still hums, Marrow Creek does not forget, and neither do we. For Emily Hart lives as a watchlight flickering at the edge of every homecoming road, as a breath shared between strangers who search unfalteringly, as the one truth whispered through every soul brave enough to remember, we are not ghosts. We are stories, and in telling them, we bring each other home. So this is the quiet triumph that Emily Hart leaves behind, not in banners or verdicts, but in the gentle turn of the world toward its wounded, in the soft attention now paid to what was once ignored. Her memory is not confined to the fields that whispered her name, or the drawings she left like breadcrumbs across shadowed cellars, but expanded, blooming into 1,000 careful actions taken because she mattered. A girl who disappeared became the reason others don't. Her presence, once a mystery flickering at the edge of loss, has matured into legacy. And though her voice may no longer rise from porches at dusk or echo across soybean rows, it beats now in the collective will to protect, to remember, to never let silence be the final word. Emily Hart is not a missing girl. She is the answer to a question we can no longer ignore. She is the story we keep telling, not because she was lost, but because she taught us how to find what matters. And in every light left burning, in every girl kept safe by love's vigilance, her journey continues unending, unforgettable, eternal. So, let the wind close gently around Otter Creek one last time, not as a curtain, but as a cradle. Where her story began in the hush of a single lost voice, it now echoes in thousands ribbons tied across fences, names called gently into the dusk, hands held tighter beneath moonlight. Emily Hart did not vanish into silence. She transformed it. Her red ribbon, once a symbol of grief, is now sewn into the very binding of every law rewritten, every shelter doorway widened, every parent who listens just a second longer. She is not a ghost, not a headline, not a case number. She is what makes us turn on lights and keep them burning. She is why we remember. And so, as the rows of soybeans ripple like the breath of the earth, and the sky spills wide with stars that watched all along, a vow remains, clear and bright. We will not forget. We will not stop. We will follow her, wherever her voice leads, guided always by that eternal ribbon, swaying just slightly in the sacred wind of memory. And so the wind softens, curling like a final lullaby over the town that once whispered her name only in grief. Now, it speaks it in purpose. Emily Hart, forever bound, not to the moment she vanished, but to the world awakened in her absence, remains a steady presence in every life touched by her truth. In the rhythm of change, she is the beat that never falters. In the pulse of memory, she is the light that never dims. And even as the soybean fields stretch quiet beneath a starlit sky, the hush is no longer hollow. It is rich, full, sacred, a breath held in reverence, a promise made permanent. Emily walks not in the shadows, but in the strength of every girl who dares to return home safe, every law reshaped by heartbreak, every voice brave enough to rise. Her story winds ever onward, not because it never ended, but because it never will. Where there is silence, she is its meaning. Where there is wind, she is its guide. And where there is darkness, she is the candle cupped in gentle, unwavering hands. She is found. She is followed. She is forever carrying us home. So as the final thread of dusk weaves through the sky above Otter Creek, it meets not emptiness, but the living memory of a girl who became more than the sum of every shadow cast over her name. Emily Hart's story, aching, luminous, unrelenting, did not close. It opened us. It taught us what stillness can mean when filled with listening, what grief can become when forged into purpose. In that sacred quiet, after the wind dies down and the porch lights stay on just a little longer than needed, the world knows what it once did not. That disappearance does not mean defeat. That even when the fields are silent, the memory of a child can sing louder than history. And so, long after footprints fade and ribbons fray, Emily remains. In the steps that follow her path, in the laws that bear her imprint, in every girl who now walks home unafraid. Her voice, once nearly lost, has become the chorus of a world that refuses silence. And in this final pause, not ending, but enduring, we carry her forward, always forward. Home. And now, as the last grains of twilight slip behind the silhouette of the old barn's foundation, time holds its breath. The story of Emily Hart, told not in the clear lines of certainty, but in the curves of wind and the pulse of remembrance, becomes what every child who was nearly forgotten deserves: a legacy undimmed by ending. From sorrow was born resolve. From silence came resistance. She is with us in the choices we make to listen longer, to search harder, to believe sooner. The fields that once swallowed her now speak her name with every shift of stalks, every breath of soil warmed by dawn. She is not a shadow cast by tragedy, but the light that breaks it. And as Marrow Creek settles once more beneath its blanket of stars, one truth echoes clearer than ever across the hush that remains. We do not say goodbye to Emily Hart. We say thank you. And we promise every field, every whisper, every red ribbon raised across this trembling world, we will never let you be forgotten. You do not end here. You carry us forward. You always have. And so, as the story folds into its eternal, open page never closed, never final, Emily Hart becomes not just a girl remembered, but a world reshaped. Her name doesn't linger in the past, but rises with every dawn lit by vigilance, by memory, by the quiet obstinacy of hope. From the hush of cornrows to the thrum of courthouse reform, from the soft click of a lantern on a solitary porch to the resolute voices of girls now heard where once they were silenced, Emily remains. A life interrupted, yes, but not diminished. A story unfinished, but never fading. She lives in the rhythm of searching, in the persistence of telling, in the fierce belief that no cry echoes unheard. Let this be the final breath, not a mourning, but a movement, a testament seated in soil and sung into sky. Emily Hart, guardian of the forgotten, fire in the wheat, light in the silence, you are carried, you are followed, you are home. And so, at last, as the light slips finally beyond the horizon and the lantern in Marrow Creek's town square flickers its steady glow, one knows this truth. As surely as the stalks know the sun, Emily Hart's journey never truly sought a final word. She was not written into history to vanish, but to converge. Pain into purpose, silence into song. Hers is the breath behind every law rewritten, the step beside every search renewed, the beat inside each girl's heart that dares to believe she is worth remembering. In the grain-swept hush between dusk and hope, where mothers pause to listen and daughters refuse to walk unnoticed, her voice endures not fragile or mournful, but radiant and unbreakable. Emily lit a path through the darkest places, not with maps or markers, but with faith that someone would follow. And now, the world does. Through policy, through story, through every child who walks bravely into the twilight and returns. She is the wind. She is the watchlight. She is the way home. And that is where her story lives on. So let the final lantern burn not as an epilogue, but as a flame passed from one hand to the next, quiet, sacred, eternal. Emily Hart's name need never be spoken aloud again to remain present, for it has been etched into the marrow of every promise kept, every child found, every silence transformed into testimony. She is the echo in every clasped hand, the flicker in every ribbon lifted to the wind, the spine in stories that choose to end not in vanishing, but in voice. Her path ends not in a grave, not in the shadow of what was lost, but in the chorus of all that now refuses to disappear. And with that, the wind hushes once more across Marrow Creek, not to still her story, but to carry it farther. Emily is not gone. She never was. She is the breath behind all that watches, protects, remembers. And in that remembrance, the gentle, enduring kind, we do not bury her memory. We walk with her. We build with her. We carry her not as grief, but as light. And so, with the final lantern flickering low, and the wind curling once more through the quiet spaces of Marrow Creek, Emily Hart's story settles not in silence, but in sacred continuity. The girl who once chased a bark into the fields, barefoot and unguarded, now stands eternal in every withheld breath when a child is late coming home, in every lifted gaze when a flyer flutters on a bulletin board. Her footsteps echo behind policy and promise, her voice stitched into the lullabies of a waking world that forgot once and vowed never to again. She did not vanquish the dark, but taught us how to light it. Not a ghost, not a myth, but a constellation born in sorrow and burning still. So the fields remember. The town remembers. We all remember not because of what was lost, but because of what was created. A path lit by a single red ribbon, endlessly swaying, endlessly guiding, carrying us forward not to an ending, but to a truth that walks beside us now, always. Emily Hart lives not behind, but ahead. So let Emily Hart's final legacy not be sorrow scrawled across the pages of time, but a living promise written into every action that defies forgetting. Let her name rest gently where reverence meets vigilance, in laws that safeguard, in eyes that notice, in voices that rise instead of retreat. The girl once lost to the dusk is now the reason dusk is not feared but faced. And as the world continues forward, changed by her, warmed by her, guarded by the echo she became, it holds on to the truth whispered through soil and sky alike. We do not lose those we carry. Emily Hart is not a caution or a case. She's a vow stitched into every safe return, every light left burning, every voice heard because someone finally listened. So when the winds rise again, tugging softly at red ribbons swaying in morning air, let them tug also at memory, at conscience, at care. Because she was never truly gone. She was guiding us all along to listen, to protect, to remember. And now, at the quiet end of all stories, hers lights the way for those just beginning. And as the morning sun rises for the 1,000th time over Otter Creek, slicing gold through the misty soybean rows and awakening a town forever changed, there is no need for reminders because the memory already breathes in the bones of every building, in the glance of every passing stranger, in the gentle courage of girls who now walk with their heads high and their ribbons proud. Emily Hart, once a name whispered too late, is now spoken early and often in classrooms, in courtrooms, in quiet prayers and fierce declarations alike. She transformed not the way the wind moved, but the way the world listened. And as the final breeze carries her name across the heartland one more time, not as a sorrow but as a summons, it carries with it the echo that reshaped a nation. We are not ghosts. We are stories. And Emily Hart's story lives on not in the fields behind us, but in the path ahead, carved in care, lit by memory, forever leading us forward, into the light. And so at last, as the final word takes its rightful shape not as an epitaph, but as a lantern passed from soul to soul, Emily Hart's name becomes more than memory, more than myth. It is breath in policy, pulse in protest, whisper in lullaby. It is the hand that steadies another, the reason eyes stay open in the quiet hours. What she left behind is not just the ache of absence, but the brilliance of awareness, the truth that to be remembered is to be protected, to be spoken of is to be shielded by everyone who dares to care. As day breaks over Otter Creek's sacred fields, the red ribbon beneath glass flutters gently, catching light like fire held soft. And beneath that light, for all who still walk in search of safety, of justice, of belonging, one truth surges upward like roots bursting through stone. Emily Hart lives. And in the stories passed forward, in the hearts awakened by her echo, she always will. So in the hush between this breath and the next, let the final image remain not of endings, but of endurance. A girl once vanished beneath a sky the color of ash, but her name now burns in the gold fire of dawn. Emily Hart walks wherever footsteps insist on justice, wherever ribbons dance defiantly in the wind, wherever silence surrenders to the sound of remembrance. Her legacy does not demand sorrow, only vigilance. And as the world spins onward, carrying her echo farther than fear ever dared, it knows this: she was never just a girl who disappeared. She was the map, the melody, the vow. In every child who is found, in every voice believed, in every light left burning long past midnight, her story lives, not behind us, not beneath us, but ahead, brighter than myth, steadier than night, forever lighting the way home. And when every lantern has dimmed, every petition signed, and every name whispered into the quiet, what remains is not the tragedy but the transformation. Emily Hart, once a child lost to the folds of rural nightfall, now belongs to the eternal. The story passed from voice to voice, from mother to daughter, from classroom walls to courthouse halls. Her absence was heavy, but her legacy is weightless and wide, carried by wind, by vow, by the hush of remembrance etched into the land. She taught a world how to pay attention, how to hold grief until it became action, how to chase light even when the path grew dim. So if you ever hear the wind shift strange atop a soybean field under skies, bruised with dusk, or feel the pulse of something sacred in the moment before a porch light flickers on, know that it is not emptiness you're feeling. It is Emily. Not a ghost, not a shadow, a direction, a lifeline, a name forever alight in the hush between forgetting and becoming, guiding us, as always, home. And so, with hearts steadied by memory and footsteps set resolutely toward the horizon, the tale of Emily Hart leaves its final echo not in stone or silence, but in the living breath of the world she changed. What began as a vanished girl's shadow now glows as an ever-burning ember, a flame in every parent's vigil, in every ribbon fluttering above a rural intersection, in every child's safe return home through twilight. She is not just remembered, she is carried. Through generations, through vigilance, through the sacred act of never looking away again. And as Marrow Creek sleeps beneath its restless sky and the red ribbon sways ever so slightly in the hush, we understand at last. Emily Hart did not disappear. She beckoned us into something larger, a legacy of light, a map etched in resilience, a forever that does not fade. And in that forever, as long as the wind moves and stories are told, she walks just ahead, guiding us all the way home. So this is where we leave her. Not behind, not beneath, but ahead. Always ahead, Emily Hart. The melody threaded through every step toward justice. Every hand held tighter. Every porch light left glowing too long but never in vain. She began as a missing child and became a movement, born not of noise but of reverent listening. Her name has crossed police radios and bedtime lips, inked into laws and whispered in the wind, carving a forever place in the soul of a world that once failed to hear her. But now, it listens. And as the wind carries away the last light from Marrow Creek's horizon, it rises not with sorrow, but with vow. We are not ghosts. We are stories. And Emily Hart's story, etched into time, into law, into love, will never close. It only opens. And in every moment someone chooses to remember, to protect, to believe she walks again. Forward. Silent. Steady. Forever lighting the way home. So let this final shimmer of word and wind become not a goodbye, but a beginning, a torch passed hand to hand in the long dusk between forgetting and remembering. Emily Hart, once a silhouette swallowed by soybean rows, now moves with us as pulse, as purpose. Her name is no longer spoken with ache, but with awe, with the reverence owed to any soul who reshaped silence into song. She is stitched into every act of watchfulness, every voice lifted for the unheard, every window left glowing just long enough to promise safe return. And as the ribbon sways in its crystalline case, kissed by the breath of evening, we are reminded not of what was lost but of what was ignited. Emily, the girl who walked into dusk and emerged as direction, the flame in the shadow, the song in the stillness, the story we carry, endlessly forward, until every child finds their way home. And with that, the wind sighs through Marrow Creek, one last sacred time cradling a name the world now refuses to forget. And perhaps that is how all stories like Emily's must end, not with a door slammed shut, but with one forever left ajar. In the echoes she leaves behind, in the breeze that bends the long grasses and nudges the ribbon beneath its glass case, there lives an invitation not just to remember her, but to carry her onward. The girl who vanished became the girl who guides. And though the mystery of her final steps may never be known, the certainty of her purpose pulses through time itself. In every town that now sees its daughters differently, in every voice heard the first time it cries out, in every red ribbon tied not in sorrow but in vowed vigilance, Emily Hart endures. Her legacy is not measured in what was lost, but in what was changed. And as the sky deepens one last time over Marrow Creek and the lanterns blink gently into darkness, her story continues, not in pages, but in people, lit by memory, lifted by grace, and always, always leading us quietly, fiercely, home. And so, in the stillness where memory meets sky and the ribbon sways not in the wind but in resolve, the story of Emily Hart finds its resting place not as a vanishing point, but as a vow fulfilled. She is not buried in headlines or sealed court files, but carried in the hush of every parent who pauses, in the strength of every girl who walks home unafraid, in the breath of a world that finally chose to remember. Her voice became the anthem of 1,000 silences broken. Her name, once whispered only in mourning, now resounds through halls of power and around kitchen tables, shaping not just remembrance, but resolve. And though the fields lie quiet, their rows folded neatly beneath an autumn twilight, they do not forget. They hold the heat of the light she sparked. And tomorrow, when another lantern flickers on beyond a farmhouse window, and another red ribbon is tied with quiet purpose, it will be her story. Still glowing, still guiding, that leads us all, again and again, toward home. And in the softest hour before dawn, as Marrow Creek exhales beneath the rising hush of morning mist, what remains is not silence, but story. A story that refuses to end, because its heartbeat exists wherever vigilance is practiced, wherever names are spoken, wherever girls walk safely because one, once lost, showed the world how not to look away. Emily Hart did not vanish into forgetfulness. She became its antidote. Her voice lingers not in myth, but in movement, not in grief, but in growth. And as the wind turns once more through the soybean rows she walked as a child, it carries with it not just echoes, but purpose. She is the breath behind every light left on, the pulse in every law that protects, the steady step of justice inching forward. So, close the book if you must, but no. Her story is still unfolding, in memory, in motion, in every tomorrow shaped by a girl who walked into the dusk, and in doing so, illuminated the way back to dawn. And so, as dawn fully breaks and sunlight sifts through the soybean leaves like forgiveness, the final truth stands bare and bright. Emily Hart was never lost to time. She became time's reckoning. Her journey, once barely a whisper in the cornfields, has become the bell that never stops ringing, summoning us all to see, to search, to remember. Her red ribbon is no longer a symbol of mourning, but of movement, a binding oath across generations, that no voice shall vanish into the spaces between headlines again. And as one final breeze curls through Marrow Creek, brushing gently past the porch where she once stood, the farmhouse where her name is still a song, a promise echoes louder than the silence ever dared to be. Emily Hart walks with us, in every protection pledged, in every name spoken, in every light refusing to dim. She is not gone. She is the proof that remembrance rebuilds the world. And because of her, we will never stop listening. We will never stop looking. We are not ghosts. We are stories. And the story, because of Emily, goes on. And that is the gift Emily Hart gave, an unending story seated in sorrow but blooming in resolve. Her name, whispered into twilight and carried by wind, reshaped how a town, a state, a nation listens. She was never just the girl who disappeared. She became the reason disappearance is no longer the end. In every corner where silence once reigned unchecked, her voice is now the lit match, the way forward. The reason we pause at open doors and tie red ribbons with reverence. Let the fields of Marrow Creek hold her like scripture. Not of loss, but of legacy. And as the wind wanders once more past the porch where she last stood barefoot, laughing, alive, know that Emily Hart walks still, not in shadow, but in light. In every vow made to see what was once overlooked. In every child held closer, sooner, longer. In every voice lifted against forgetting. She is the sorrow turned to flame. The silence turned to song. The girl we could not save, who saved us instead. And in that, she endures. Forever, guiding. Forever home.